In its latest gesture as a champion of community advocates, Eastern Bank recently honored the contribution of two women from Roxbury. They both share concerns and passion about quality education, and they both made their mark in different channels, from the local news media to corporate philanthropy. To tell us about the awards to Sarah Ann Shaw and her daughter Klare Shaw are the bank's vice chair and president, Quincy Miller, and of course, Sarah Ann Shaw. I'd like to thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I want to start with Quincy. You gave the award out. Tell me what the award is for and why you chose Sarah Ann and her daughter.
Yeah, absolutely. So our Community Advocacy Awards are awards that we do every year to really recognize members of the community who, in their own exceptional way, have made a difference, have been able to spend their time and talents fighting for social justice and economic justice. And this year, in particular, we're celebrating 200 years. And as such, our first customer was a woman by the name of Rebecca Sutton. So we wanted to make our Community Advocacy Awards around a woman or women who have really made a difference, as that's our area of focus. And who better than to recognize Sarah Ann and her daughter Klare Shaw for their outstanding work in really advancing women in so many ways.
Sarah Ann,
Thank you for those kind
we
words.
have the photo catching you and your daughter in the act of community advocacy around education. Tell us the story about that.
Well, as you know too well, that court-ordered school desegregation really turned Boston upside down, practically. And there was a minister who kept a vigil near the school committee headquarters, and we decided we would picket one day. And I grabbed Klare, and I said, "Come on, we're going down." And there was a young man whose name I can't remember. He was a student, and he was part of the Northern Student Movement, which was an organization that I was director of in those days. And we went and we took our little signs and we marched up and down in front of 15 Beacon. It's a hotel now, a very chic hotel, but in those days it was the Boston Public School, home of the school committee and the home of Louise Day Hicks and others. And so we just went, just the three of us, and marched around in front of. And people went by and they kind of looked at us quizzically, couldn't figure out what was going on, but if they had read the sign, they would have understood that we were there to try to figure out what can we do to make the school system better in Boston. I'm a product of the Boston Public Schools. I'm a graduate of Girls Latin School, but I knew what I believed that I learned what I needed to know when I was in school, but by the 50s and 60s, that wasn't the case. Children weren't really getting what they needed.
Well, one thing I think overshadowed by the controversy around the federal court decision in 1974 is that for several years before that, there were all these parents from the black community in Boston who were really getting out, organizing and fighting some very discriminatory practices by the school committee.
Oh, you mean Operation Exodus?
Yeah, all these efforts to get their kids better schools.
Yeah. As I said, I directed the Northern Student Movement, where we recruited students from all local colleges to come into Roxbury and Dorchester to tutor the children. And as part of the organization, I said we need to have a parent organization. So I hired Ellen Jackson and Betty Johnson to be parent organizers. And they were the precursors of Operation Exodus. And they said, we're going to have people.
Quincy, I want to ask you if in your own growing up, I know it wasn't around Boston, but was there a point where your education somehow was benefited by some kind of community advocacy too?
Well, I think really, much of my growing up was influenced from my family members. Single parent household. My mother was very independent. and her parents were there to help. So it was probably more, that was the community, if you will, for me. As a kid that was out with, everyone else, growing up in the projects and in the streets. And it was more of a community effort to help kids where I grew up in Pennsylvania. But definitely that inspiration from my mother's determination and from my grandparents is what drove me to try to be successful and then ultimately to succeed in education.
So, and speaking of parents, what about your family? Maybe your father had something to do with your advocacy?
My father was a Southerner. He was born in Alabama, but he was interested, I can't tell you how interested he was in politics and what was going on. In those days, most black people voted Republican. And he belonged to a group called the Roxbury Democratic Club. And so he was involved with that. And he used to take me and my brother to Ford Hall to hear the lectures. I mean, I know that we did not understand who the people were that were giving the lecture or but we went and we absorbed it, and I guess it just sort of went through our system. I remember he took us to hear Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was
the singer, yes.
The singer, and not just a singer, he was the singer. He was a very, very smart man who was
a human rights ambassador, I would say,
yes,
too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Masons had a building on Tremont Street, and he was speaking there, and people didn't want him speaking there, and the police came and turned the place out. And I mean, I was really too young to understand the implication of some of the things that were going on, but my father said, we're going, and so we went. In those days, you didn't have freedom of choice in the same way that many young people have nowadays. And
the impact of those generations, Sarah Ann going with her father, Claire coming with you when you're picketing for the school. I'd say it's not so much that the apple fell far from the tree. It's as much that you got that ladder out, climbed that ladder, picked the apple, and then handed it down to the next generation. And that's so much around the influence of being involved in social justice.
This has been a news, and we're talking with community advocate and media trailblazer Klare Shaw and Quincy Miller at Eastern Bank. Quincy, we're talking about advocacy, but advocacy, isn't that really a form of community investment? You know about that. You're in the banking business.
It is. And look, being part of the community is core to really any financial institution, but particularly to us. We as a mutual bank, our focus is really on serving our three key constituents: our customers, our colleagues, and our community. And the stronger our communities are, particularly from a financial strength, the stronger the bank does. And that's what's helped us to persevere over these past 200 years.
Well, I want to say that I think that what you all do is very, very important. And it's very interesting because I don't remember First National Bank or some of the other banks that had been in Boston for a long time doing that kind of outreach and really acknowledging people who were really trying to change their lives, change the contours of their particular community. And I must commend you all for it.
But that's a role, though, Chris, from a private company perspective, is to help be a voice together with the community and the public entities. It's important for us to use our voice as a large private employer to make a difference.
So, and of course, I have to ask you about what you're mostly known for in Boston is that not just being an advocate, but maybe using that foundation of advocacy to segue into the news field. And I should say that's sort of an underestimation. It wasn't that easy. I mean, you're breaking through barriers here. So talking about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got to become a reporter at Channel 4 because there was an organization called the Boston Community Media Council, and we were not happy with the lack of blacks, and never mind people who didn't speak English. They weren't really present. You didn't really see them, and a lot of times what you saw were not. They didn't really reflect all the good things that were going on in the community. You could rest assured that if there was something bad, you would get some coverage. So there were a group of us, Muriel Snowden from Freedom House, and Virgil Wood, and a number of people who were active, Mel King. And we had Boston Community Media Council. And what we did, we worked, met with the media moguls of the day, and said, no, you really need to hire some people of color, and you really need to do some stories that reflect the positive things that are going on in the community. And so that's what we did.
And Quincy, you're doing that at the bank. Why put that emphasis on the positive?
Well, again, it's really about that message. And, unfortunately, there's challenges that's going on in our country today. But if you can rally your community around being able to make a difference and the positive, we really believe that good could overcome much of those challenges that we have. And you have to raise up the voices of those in the past that have made a difference to make sure their legacy continues on and inspires others to join that movement.
Thank you both very much, Quincy Miller and Sarah Ann Shaw.
You're very welcome.